The courtroom was full that morning, people whispering, papers shuffling, and the air heavy with tension. At the front sat the judge, calm and serious. Beside him, the clerk typing every word that was said. Lawyers dressed in black coats moved around confidently, holding thick files as if they already knew who would win. In the middle of all this, a small boy stood quietly beside his mother, his feet barely reaching the floor when he sat down. He was wearing a clean but slightly oversized shirt, and his nervous fingers kept playing with the edge of his notebook. He looked around and saw people staring at him, some with surprise, others with pity. This was Malik, only 9 years old. His mother, Denise, was sitting next to him, her eyes tired but full of love. She had been fighting an unfair case against her landlord, who wanted to throw them out of their small apartment. Denise could not afford a lawyer. She had lost her job a few months ago and was struggling just to keep the lights on. Still, she had chosen to come and defend herself. But when people in the court saw her son beside her, holding papers and whispering in her ear, they began to smile. Some laughed quietly. One lawyer even shook his head and said softly, "This is not a playground." A few people in the back chuckled, thinking it was funny that a child had come to court to help his mother. Malik heard them all, and his small hands trembled a little. But he didn't look away. The judge tapped his pen and looked down from the bench. "Ma'am, who is this boy?" he asked. His tone half curious, half amused. Denise answered softly, "He's my son, Your Honor." The judge raised his eyebrow. "Your son? Is he representing you?" The courtroom laughed again. The sound echoed through the wooden walls. Malik's face turned red, but he stood up straight. "No, sir," he said politely, his voice clear but small. "I'm just helping my mom." The laughter grew louder. Someone whispered, "Helping her? What can a 9-year-old do?" Another person snorted. "Maybe he'll read her bedtime stories from the law book." Malik could hear every word, every cruel joke, but instead of crying, he just tightened his grip on the notebook and took a deep breath. His mother placed her hand on his shoulder and whispered, "Ignore them, baby. Just be calm." Denise herself was shaking, not because of fear, but because she hated how the court was treating them. She had come for fairness, not laughter. When the landlord's lawyer started speaking, he sounded confident and smooth. He smiled at the judge and said, "Your Honor, this is a simple case of unpaid rent." He made it sound like Denise was a careless tenant, someone who didn't respect rules. Malik frowned slightly because he knew that wasn't true. His mother had always paid rent, but the landlord had refused to fix broken things in the house and then blamed her when problems got worse. Denise tried to explain, but her voice trembled. She stumbled over the legal words. The lawyer smirked, as if enjoying the struggle. Malik leaned forward and whispered, "Mom, tell him about the photos." She nodded and nervously pulled out a small envelope. Inside were pictures of the broken heater, the leaking roof, and the cracked windows. When she showed them, the lawyer rolled his eyes. "Your Honor, these pictures don't prove anything," he said. "And with all due respect, we can't take this seriously, especially with this child sitting here." The court laughed again. Malik looked down for a moment, and then looked up. Something in him changed. He stood up quietly and said, "Excuse me, Your Honor, may I speak?" The courtroom fell silent for a second. The judge blinked, surprised, and then nodded slowly. "Go ahead, son," he said. Malik opened his notebook, his small fingers flipping through the pages filled with his handwriting. "Sir, my mom did pay rent," he said. "Here are the receipts." He held them up carefully. "And the landlord didn't fix the heater, even though the law says he has to keep the house safe for people to live in." His voice was calm, confident, and full of truth. Everyone watched in silence. Even the lawyer stopped smiling. The judge leaned forward and asked, "Where did you learn that, young man?" Malik answered softly, "I read it online, sir. I just wanted to help my mom." The laughter that had filled the room earlier was gone. People who had smiled mockingly now looked guilty. They hadn't expected a child to speak like that, to sound so brave and honest. Denise wiped her eyes, proud and emotional. She couldn't believe how strong her son was being. The judge nodded slowly. "You're a smart boy," he said. "Thank you for bringing this up." Malik smiled shyly and sat down again, clutching his notebook to his chest. From that moment, no one laughed anymore. The courtroom that had once been full of noise now felt respectful and quiet. Malik's courage had changed the atmosphere. It wasn't about jokes anymore, it was about truth. Denise felt a warmth spread through her chest. Her little boy had stood up not just for her, but for what was right. She reached for his hand and squeezed it, whispering, "I'm proud of you." Malik didn't say anything. He just smiled and looked straight ahead, ready to face whatever came next. Outside, when the hearing ended for the day, people looked at Malik differently. Some smiled at him kindly. Others nodded in quiet respect. He had walked into that courtroom as a boy who everyone laughed at, but he left as someone who made grown-ups think twice before underestimating a child's heart. The laughter had faded, but Malik's voice still echoed in their minds, small yet powerful, reminding everyone that courage doesn't come with age. It comes from love and truth, and sometimes it takes a 9-year-old to show adults what real bravery looks like. After that day in court, Denise Carter walked home holding her son's hand tightly. Her shoes were worn, her steps were slow, and her heart felt heavy. The sound of people's laughter from the courtroom still echoed in her ears, but next to her, Malik walked proudly, his little chest lifted high. He didn't care that they laughed. He only cared that he had stood beside his mom. Their home was a small apartment on the corner of a noisy street. The walls were cracked, and the heater barely worked every winter. Cold wind slipped through the broken window frames. The landlord never fixed it, and when Denise complained, he blamed her. She had taken pictures, written letters, even called the city once. But no one helped, they said. "We'll look into it," and then forgot. Denise worked as a cleaner in a small office building downtown. Every morning she woke up before sunrise, made Malik breakfast, and took 2 buses to work. Her hands were rough from scrubbing floors, but she never complained. When she lost her job because the company downsized, she felt her world collapse without that paycheck. She could barely afford rent. The landlord, a man named Mr. Turner, didn't care about her struggle. He came one morning knocking loudly on the door. "You're behind on rent again," he said coldly. Denise tried to explain that she just needed a little more time, but he didn't listen. A week later, she received the eviction notice. She sat at the table staring at it for hours. Malik watched her quietly, his small face full of worry. That night, while she cried softly, Malik walked up and put his little hand on hers. "Mom, we're not going anywhere," he said. "I'll help you," Denise tried to smile, wiping her tears. "You can't help with this, sweetheart. This is grown-up stuff." But Malik shook his head. "You always help me with my school stuff, now I'll help you." From that day, something changed inside him. While other kids watched cartoons, Malik sat beside his mother reading papers. He searched for words online that he didn't understand, like tenant rights, eviction laws, and hearing date. He wrote everything down in a small notebook with a blue cover. He asked his teacher for help with reading difficult words. His teacher was amazed but didn't know why Malik was suddenly interested in law. Every night after dinner, Denise and Malik sat together at the small kitchen table. The light above them flickered, and the sound of cars passing outside filled the silence. Malik read out loud from printouts he had made. "It says here that the landlord has to fix things that are broken if they make the place unsafe," he said. Denise looked at him surprised. "Really?" she asked, and Malik nodded proudly. "Yes, it's the law." Slowly, Denise began to feel a new kind of strength. She had spent so long feeling small, invisible, like the world didn't care. But now, watching her son believe in her made her want to believe in herself too. She began organizing all her documents, rent receipts, letters, and photos, in neat folders. She even practiced speaking out loud, pretending to be in court. Malik would sit across from her pretending to be the judge. "Why should I not evict you, ma'am?" he'd ask seriously, and Denise would take a deep breath and answer, "Because I paid my rent on time and the landlord didn't fix what he was supposed to." They would both laugh at first, but soon it became serious practice. Denise was learning confidence from her child. One evening, the electricity went out again. They sat in the dark, candles lighting the room. "Mom," Malik said quietly, "do you think we'll win?" Denise paused, looking at the candle flame. "I don't know, baby," she said. "But we'll try." Malik smiled. "Then we'll win," he said simply. And in that small room filled with shadows, his faith felt bigger than the whole world. Days turned into weeks, and Denise grew stronger. She went to the courthouse to file papers herself. The clerk looked at her with surprise when she spoke clearly and confidently. She didn't sound scared anymore. Malik had made her brave that night. She came home smiling. "They accepted our case," she told him, and Malik grinned so wide his eyes sparkled. But behind that smile, Denise still carried fear. She knew the landlord had money and lawyers, and she had none. Every time she saw him outside, he smirked. "You think you can win without a lawyer?" he said once. Denise didn't answer. She just walked past him, holding her head high because she knew her son was watching and she didn't want him to see her afraid. As the hearing day came closer, Denise couldn't sleep. She worried about what might happen if they lost. Where would they go? What would happen to Malik's school, his books, his friends? But every time those thoughts came, she remembered Malik's small, determined voice saying, "Then we'll win," and it gave her peace. The night before the court date, Malik stayed up late reading. Denise woke up and found him asleep on the table, his head resting on his notebook, pages full of notes and questions. She covered him with a blanket and kissed his forehead, whispering, "You're my hero." When morning came, Denise put on her best clothes, the same ones she had worn to job interviews, and braided her hair neatly. Malik wore his school shirt freshly ironed. He looked at his mother and said, "You're ready, Mom." She smiled nervously. "We're ready," she corrected him. They walked to the courthouse holding hands again, but this time, Denise's steps felt stronger. She didn't feel like a poor, helpless woman anymore. She felt like a fighter. She was walking beside her son, the boy who had taught her how to stand tall, how to believe again. Inside her heart, she whispered a prayer, not for victory, but for courage, for the strength to face whatever came next. And for her son, the little boy who had become her biggest source of hope. The world might have seen her as weak, but that day, because of Malik, she knew she was not just a struggling mother anymore. She was a warrior, fighting for her home, her dignity, and her child's future. After that first day in court, Malik could not stop thinking about everything that had happened. He replayed the laughter, the judge's surprised face, and the way his mother had tried to stay strong even when everyone looked down on her. The sound of people mocking them stayed in his ears. But instead of feeling sad, it made something spark inside him, a small fire that refused to go out. He wanted to understand more. He wanted to help his mother better. He wanted to make sure that the next time they stepped into that courtroom, no one would dare to laugh. When he came home from school the next day, he didn't turn on the TV or play with his friends. Instead, he opened his old, cracked tablet, searched how to prepare for court hearing, and started reading. The words were big and confusing, but Malik didn't give up. He typed every difficult word into another search box, trying to understand one sentence at a time. Every night when his mother thought he was asleep, Malik was sitting near the dim light of a candle or the glow of his screen, reading about housing rights, tenants' laws, and legal cases. He didn't even know how to pronounce some of the terms, but he wrote them carefully in his blue notebook, spelling them letter by letter. The notebook began to fill quickly. On one page, he had written, "Evidence or proof." On another, "Lawyer," someone who knows the rules. He drew arrows, underlined important points, and made small notes like, "Mom has all rent receipts," "show pictures," and "stay calm in front of judge." It looked like a mix of school notes and dreams. At school, Malik sat quietly during lunch while others laughed and played. He took out his notebook and reviewed what he had learned. One day, his teacher, Ms. Wilson, noticed him sitting alone and walked over. "Malik, why are you reading about court laws?" she asked kindly. Malik looked up shyly and said, "My mom has a case and I'm helping her." She smiled, thinking he was pretending. But when she looked at the pages filled with serious notes, her eyes softened. "You're a brave boy," she said gently, "and your mom is lucky to have you." Those words meant everything to him. That evening, when Denise came home from cleaning a neighbor's house for extra cash, Malik ran to her. "Mom, I learned something new today," he said excitedly. "If the landlord didn't fix the heater, it's called neglect, and it's against the housing law." Denise smiled tiredly. "You're learning faster than me, sweetheart." Malik shook his head. "No, we're learning together." Every night became a study session. The kitchen table turned into their little courtroom. Sometimes Malik would read questions in a deep voice, pretending to be a lawyer, and Denise would answer nervously. "Objection," he'd shout dramatically, making her laugh. For a few moments, the sadness disappeared, replaced by warmth and laughter that felt like hope. But deep inside, Malik took it all seriously. He wanted to protect his mom, not just by being there, but by being prepared. He read about how to present evidence, how to speak respectfully, how to tell the truth clearly without fear. He watched videos of real court hearings, studying how judges reacted and how people made their arguments. One evening, while they were studying, the power went out again. Malik sighed but didn't stop. He lit a candle and said, "Mom, maybe this is a sign." Denise looked at him, puzzled. "A sign for what?" Malik smiled faintly. "A sign that even when the lights go out, we can still keep going." Denise felt her throat tighten. She hugged him tightly. "You're my light, baby," she whispered. Malik hugged her back, not realizing how deep those words would stay with her. Days passed, and Malik's confidence grew. He began organizing the papers better than most adults could. He made a file with colored sections, receipts, photos, letters, and law notes. On the cover, he wrote in neat handwriting, "Carter versus Turner." He didn't know that this was how real cases were titled. He just thought it looked official. When the landlord came again to threaten them, Malik stood beside his mother, his chin slightly raised. "Sir, we have proof that we paid rent," he said firmly. The man looked down at him with irritation. "You think you're a lawyer now, boy?" he sneered. Malik looked him straight in the eye and said quietly, "Not yet." The landlord froze for a moment, then walked away, muttering angrily. That night, Denise laughed for the first time in weeks. She told Malik, "You scared him." Malik grinned. "I just told the truth." At school, Malik's teacher noticed he was often tired, sometimes falling asleep in class, but when she found out why, she gave him old legal textbooks that her brother, a lawyer, had left behind. Malik carried them proudly, even though they were heavy and full of complicated words. He read every page, sometimes rereading the same line 10 times until it made sense. On weekends, he went to the public library, sitting in the quiet corner with piles of law books. The librarian grew fond of him and helped him print documents. "You remind me of someone who wants to change the world," she said once. Malik smiled shyly. "I just want to help my mom." As the next court hearing approached, Malik felt both nervous and excited. He had prepared everything, every page marked, every fact ready. Sometimes, when he lay in bed, he imagined himself standing in front of the judge again, this time not as a scared little boy, but as someone who could make people listen. He didn't know big words like justice or integrity deeply yet, but he understood their meaning better than most adults. To him, justice meant seeing his mom smile again. It meant having a safe home. It meant not being laughed at for being small. One evening, as they finished reviewing the documents, Denise looked at Malik and said softly, "You've done so much, my love. But remember, no matter what happens, you've already made me proud." Malik looked up and smiled. "I'm not stopping until we win, Mom," he said, his voice quiet but firm. That night, Denise lay awake, thinking about how life had forced her little boy to grow up so quickly. She felt pain for that, but also pride, because Malik wasn't just learning laws. He was learning courage, patience, and the value of standing for what's right. And somewhere deep inside her heart, she knew. The same boy who once played with toy cars on the floor was now building something far greater, the strength that would one day change both their lives forever. The morning of the hearing arrived colder than usual. Clouds hung low in the sky and the streets glistened with dew. Denise woke before the alarm, her heart already racing. She sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the old clock ticking softly. This was the day that could change everything. She whispered a small prayer under her breath, asking for strength, not miracles. Malik was already awake, dressed neatly in his school shirt, his blue notebook tucked under his arm. He had packed the papers carefully the night before, labeling every page with sticky notes so his mom wouldn't get lost during the hearing. He looked up at her and said, "We're ready." "Mom?" And though Denise smiled, her hands trembled slightly as she buttoned her coat. They stepped out of the apartment and began walking to the courthouse. Buses roared past, people hurried to work, but for them, the world felt slower. Every step carried the weight of sleepless nights. Every breath carried hope and fear mixed together. Malik held his mother's hand tightly, as if his small fingers could transfer courage to her. When they reached the courthouse, the tall building looked even bigger than before. The glass doors reflected their faces. Tired but determined inside, the hall was buzzing with people. Lawyers carrying briefcases, guards standing tall, and the faint sound of shoes clicking against the floor. Malik and Denise looked out of place, but they didn't care. They walked straight to the courtroom. As they entered, a few people turned to look. The same faces that had left last time recognized them. Whispers began to spread again. Malik could feel it, but this time, he didn't lower his head. He walked with quiet confidence, holding the folder close to his chest like a shield. Denise squeezed his hand and whispered, "No matter what happens, we tell the truth." He nodded firmly. Always the judge entered, everyone stood, and the sound of chairs scraping filled the room. When everyone sat down, the judge looked at Denise and then at Malik. His expression softened slightly. "You're back, Mrs. Carter," he said, "and I see your son is here again." Denise nodded politely. "Yes, Your Honor." The landlord's lawyer smirked from across the room, his expensive suit perfectly pressed. His voice smooth as he began. "Your Honor, this is a simple case of unpaid rent and refusal to cooperate." He glanced at Denise as if she were already defeated. But Malik noticed every detail. The missing papers, the overconfidence, the false tone of certainty. When it was Denise's turn, she stood up. Her knees shaking slightly, Malik stood beside her, handing her the right papers at the right moment. "Your Honor," she began softly, "I have always paid my rent on time." She showed the receipts. The lawyer immediately interrupted. "Those could be copies," he said. But Malik stepped forward and said politely, "Sir, those are originals. See the signatures and dates." The courtroom went quiet. All eyes turned to the boy. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. The judge tilted his head. "You've prepared, haven't you?" Malik nodded slightly. "Yes, sir. I helped my mom check everything." The lawyer gave a forced smile. "That's very cute, but we are here to discuss facts." Malik looked at him calmly and said, "That's exactly what I'm doing." The judge raised his eyebrows but didn't interrupt. Malik opened his notebook and pointed to one of the documents. "Your Honor, according to Section 92 of the Local Housing Code, landlords must repair heating and plumbing within a reasonable time." The judge looked impressed. "Where did you learn that?" Malik answered softly. "I read it online. I just wanted to understand why my mom was being blamed." Denise watched her son, her eyes wide with pride and disbelief. Her little boy, who once played with crayons and toy cars, was now quoting laws in front of a courtroom full of adults. The lawyer tried to regain control. "This is absurd," he said sharply. "A child should not be involved in legal matters," but the judge interrupted. "A child who knows the law better than some adults deserves to be heard." The lawyer went silent, his smirk fading. Malik walked forward and handed a photo to the judge. "This is our heater, sir," he said. "It's been broken for months. My mom called. She sent letters, but no one fixed it." The judge studied the photo carefully. The rusted pipes, the old wires, the visible mold. "Did you report this to housing services?" he asked. Denise nodded. "Yes, but no one came," Malik added softly. "Because we don't matter much to them." The courtroom was silent again. Everyone could feel the weight of those words, not just because they were true, but because they came from a child who had seen too much of the world's unfairness. The judge cleared his throat and looked at the landlord. "Is this accurate?" The man shifted uncomfortably. "Well, we intended to fix it." "Intended?" Malik repeated quietly. "But you didn't." His tone wasn't angry. It was simply honest. Denise's fear began to fade, replaced by a strange calm every time Malik spoke. She felt stronger. She stood taller. Her hands stopped shaking for the first time. She felt like they were being heard, truly heard. The hearing continued for another hour. Every question the lawyer asked, Malik had a quiet answer ready. Every lie was met with proof. Every attempt to twist the truth was stopped by the facts Malik had gathered. At one point, the judge smiled faintly and said, "I've seen many people come to this court, but I've never seen anyone like you." "Young man," Malik blushed and looked down. "Thank you, sir," he said. "I just wanted to help my mom." The judge nodded slowly. "You've done more than that." When the hearing finally ended, everyone in the room felt different. The same people who had once laughed at the sight of a boy standing beside his mother were now silent. Even the lawyer looked uneasy. The judge took a deep breath and said, "I'll review the evidence and give my decision soon." He glanced at Malik once more. You should be proud, both of you." As they left the courtroom, Denise felt tears in her eyes, but they weren't tears of fear anymore. They were tears of pride. She looked down at her son and said, "You did it, baby." Malik smiled softly. "No, Mom, we did it." Outside, the sky had cleared, sunlight breaking through the gray clouds. The cold air felt different, lighter, hopeful. As they walked down the courthouse steps hand in hand, Malik turned to look back at the building one last time. He didn't know what the judge would decide yet, but he knew something far more important. They had been heard. They had stood tall and no one laughed this time. When the judge called for a short recess, people began to whisper softly. No one laughed anymore. The same crowd that had giggled and smirked at the beginning of the case now sat with straight faces, their eyes following the small boy who had just turned the courtroom upside down. Malik sat quietly beside his mother, flipping through his blue notebook, his hands steady, his face calm. He didn't realize that the entire room had gone still. Denise looked at him with pride shining through her tired eyes. Her heart was pounding. She had come to court feeling like a nobody, but her son had made her feel like someone again. The people who once looked at her with pity now looked at her with respect. She could see it in their eyes. When the recess ended, the judge returned and everyone stood. The air felt heavier than before, but this time, it wasn't filled with judgment. It was filled with quiet anticipation. Even the landlord's lawyer looked uneasy. His earlier arrogance had melted away. He shuffled through his papers nervously. Avoiding eye contact with Malik, the judge cleared his throat and said, "Let's continue," his voice calm but firm. Malik straightened his posture, his small shoulders squared. He looked ready, like a soldier about to defend what mattered most. Denise whispered, "Remember, speak only if the judge asks." Malik nodded gently, but deep down he knew that if truth needed a voice, he wouldn't stay silent. The lawyer began again, trying to regain control. "Your Honor, this case is being exaggerated. The landlord did attempt repairs," he said smoothly, but Malik raised his hand politely. The judge noticed and nodded. "Go ahead." "Young man," Malik pointed to one of the documents. "Sir, that repair request was dated after we got the eviction notice." The judge leaned forward. "Is that true?" he asked. The lawyer hesitated. "Well, perhaps there was a delay." Malik's soft voice cut through again. "The heater was broken for 3 months, sir. It wasn't a delay. It was neglect." The courtroom stayed silent. The sound of Malik's words echoed like tiny hammers striking truth into stone. The judge leaned back, impressed. Denise felt her chest rise with pride. She could hardly believe that this brave, calm boy was her son. The same child who once needed her to tie his shoelaces now stood tall. Defending her with courage beyond his years, the landlord tried to speak up. "The boy doesn't understand how business works," he said gruffly. Malik looked at him, his eyes steady but respectful. "Maybe not, sir," he said, "but I understand what's right and what's wrong." That single sentence made the entire courtroom pause again. Even the judge smiled faintly, his pen tapping lightly on his desk. The lawyer flipped through his notes, his voice starting to lose confidence. "The building is old, Your Honor. Repairs take time," but Malik gently interrupted again. "Yes, sir, but rent money was still collected every month." "Wasn't it?" The lawyer froze, unable to respond. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Answer the question," the lawyer sighed. "Yes, Your Honor." It was in that moment that something invisible shifted. The courtroom no longer saw Malik as just a boy. They saw him as a symbol of truth, small but unshakable, brave but humble. The quietness in the room wasn't empty. It was full of realization, a deep silence that spoke louder than laughter ever could. Denise held her hands together, her heart trembling with a mix of fear and awe. She whispered a thank you to God under her breath. She remembered all the nights Malik had stayed awake reading, the times he said, "Don't give up, Mom," and she finally understood. Her son wasn't just fighting for their home. He was fighting for her dignity, for her to be seen as more than just another struggling mother. The judge leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand. "Mr. Turner," he said, addressing the landlord, "did you ever provide written confirmation that repairs would be done?" The man stuttered, "No, sir, but I—" "Then it's clear," the judge interrupted gently, "that your tenant's concerns were ignored." Malik's eyes brightened slightly. He felt like a small piece of justice had just clicked into place. The lawyer tried to object. "Your Honor, with all due respect, we can't base a decision on the words of a child." The judge looked directly at him and said calmly, This child has provided more factual evidence and clear reasoning than you have today." There was a quiet gasp in the courtroom. Denise looked down to hide her smile. Malik didn't smile, though. He simply looked at his notebook again, checking to make sure nothing was missed. It wasn't pride that filled him. It was focus. He wanted to make sure his mother was safe, that they wouldn't lose their home again when the judge asked if there was anything else. Malik hesitated for a moment and then said softly, "Your Honor, I just want to say something." The judge nodded. "Go ahead." Malik took a deep breath and looked at everyone. "My mom is not trying to fight anyone. She just wants a fair chance. She works hard. She pays rent. She just wants a home where things work properly." His voice trembled slightly at the end, but his words were steady. No one spoke after that. Even the lawyer looked down. The judge took off his glasses, rubbing them slowly, and then said in a calm voice, "Thank you, Malik." The silence that followed was unlike anything the courtroom had experienced before. It wasn't awkward. It was powerful. Everyone could feel it. A kind of quiet respect that wrapped itself around the small boy and his mother. Denise felt tears welling in her eyes. She reached over and took Malik's hand. Squeezing it gently, he looked at her and smiled faintly. A smile that said, "We did our best, Mom." The judge announced that he would review all evidence and make his decision soon. But everyone in that room already knew what the real outcome was. The laughter was gone. The mockery was gone, and in its place stood respect. As Malik and Denise walked out of the courtroom, people moved aside, some even nodded politely. One older woman whispered, "That boy's going to be somebody one day." Malik didn't hear it, but Denise did, and she knew it was true outside. The sky was calm and blue. A gentle wind blew through the trees. Denise looked down at Malik. "You made the court quiet," she said softly. Malik looked up and smiled. "No, Mom. The truth did." And with that, they walked home together hand in hand, their shadows long but their spirits light, knowing that something powerful had changed, not just in the courtroom, but in their lives forever. The courtroom felt different that morning. There was no laughter, no whispering, no one daring to make jokes anymore. The air carried quiet respect, even curiosity. People were waiting to see what would happen next. Malik sat beside his mother, calm but alert. His small hands folded neatly on his blue notebook. He had come prepared, not just with papers but with faith. The landlord's lawyer looked tense. Gone was the confident smirk he had worn on the first day. Now he shuffled through his papers with shaky hands, searching for something, anything, that could save his case. Denise watched silently, her heart steady for the first time in months. She had walked into this fight with fear, but now she sat with courage. Courage born from her son's unwavering belief in her. The judge entered, and the entire room stood. As everyone sat again, his voice broke the silence. "We will continue where we left off," he said, his tone serious but gentle. He looked at Denise and then at Malik. "Mrs. Carter, your son has impressed this court with his understanding and respect. I ask everyone here to remember that truth has no age." Those words filled the room like sunlight through clouds. Malik looked down shyly, his cheeks turning warm. He didn't like praise, he just wanted fairness. He whispered to his mother, "We're almost there, Mom," and she nodded, her fingers tightening around his. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Your Honor, while this is an emotional situation, we must remember the facts," he began, trying to sound confident again. "The tenant failed to maintain communication, and repairs were delayed because of her negligence." Malik's eyes widened slightly. He looked at his notes, flipping to the page where he had written down dates and messages. He whispered, "That's not true." The judge looked up. "Do you have something to add, young man?" Malik hesitated, then nodded. He stood up. "Holding a few printed pages, Your Honor. These are the messages my mom sent to the landlord about the broken heater. They were sent weeks before the eviction notice," he said, walking forward carefully, handing them to the clerk. The judge read them, his brow furrowing. "It says here the tenant reported issues on November 3rd. And again on November 10th, he said. Mr. Turner, did you receive these?" The landlord shifted uncomfortably. I might have," he muttered. Malik spoke softly. "He replied on November 25th saying it wasn't his responsibility." The courtroom gasped quietly. The judge looked at the landlord sharply. "Not your responsibility?" he repeated. The man swallowed hard. "It was a misunderstanding," he said weakly. Malik's voice cut through again, calm but firm. "It wasn't a misunderstanding when we had no heat for 2 months." "Sir?" Denise watched her son, amazed by his bravery. He wasn't shouting, he wasn't rude. He was just speaking truth with the kind of calm that only comes from certainty. The lawyer tried to interrupt again. "Your Honor, this is getting out of hand. This is just a child." But the judge raised his hand, silencing him. "A child who understands honesty better than some adults," he said, his voice firm. That moment was the turning point. The energy in the courtroom changed completely. Malik wasn't just a boy anymore, he was the voice of reason. And everyone knew it. The judge leaned back in his chair. "Looking thoughtful, Mr. Turner," he said. "You've taken rent payments consistently, yet failed to provide basic living conditions. Do you have any justification?" The landlord's face turned red. I didn't realize it was that bad," he stammered. Malik's gentle voice came again. "You did, sir. My mom sent you pictures too." The judge looked down at the photos, showing mold, broken windows, and a damaged heater. His face hardened. "This is unacceptable," he said quietly. The lawyer opened his mouth to argue but couldn't find words. Denise felt tears in her eyes. She tried to hold them back. She didn't want to cry in front of everyone, but she couldn't help it. The struggle, the fear, the nights of hopelessness, they all came rushing back. Yet this time her tears weren't from pain, they were from pride. She looked at Malik, and for a moment, the rest of the world disappeared. The judge finally spoke. "Mrs. Carter, you have provided sufficient evidence to support your claims. I commend your persistence." Then he looked at Malik. "And you, young man, have shown intelligence, respect, and integrity far beyond your years." Malik looked down, mumbling, "Thank you, sir." The landlord's lawyer tried one last move. "Your Honor, perhaps we can settle this matter privately," he said quickly. The judge looked unimpressed. "You mean, after trying to evict this family unfairly?" he said dryly. "I don't think so." The courtroom chuckled quietly. Not the cruel laughter from before, but soft, approving laughter that carried relief. Malik looked up at the judge and said softly, "Does that mean we can stay?" The judge smiled faintly. "That's not for me to say just yet. But I can tell you this, you've done something remarkable today." The lawyer sat down. Defeated, the landlord stared at the floor. Avoiding everyone's gaze, Denise took a deep breath, feeling the weight slowly lift off her shoulders. For months she had felt like the world was against her. But in that courtroom, the truth had finally stood tall. Not because of power or money, but because of her little boy. When the hearing ended, the judge asked Malik to approach. "I want you to keep learning," he said kindly. "You have a gift one day. You'll use it to help many more people." Malik smiled. "I will, sir," he said, his voice quiet but sure. As they left the courtroom, people smiled at them. A few even clapped softly. One man whispered, "That boy just changed his system today." Denise didn't respond. She just looked down at Malik, brushing his hair gently. "You did it. Sweetheart," she whispered, "you made them listen." Malik looked up at her and said, "No, Mom, we made them listen." Outside, the sun broke through the clouds again. The same courthouse that had once felt cold and cruel now glowed in the morning light. Denise took a deep breath of fresh air. It felt different, lighter, freer. Malik smiled and pointed at the sky. "See, Mom? Even the clouds moved," he said playfully. Denise laughed softly. Maybe they were scared of you too. They walked home slowly, not rushing this time. People passed by them without knowing what had just happened. That inside that courthouse, a 9-year-old boy had reminded adults what truth and courage really meant. Malik looked at his mom and said, "Do you think the judge will rule for us?" She looked down at him and smiled. "I think he already did." Baby, that was the day everything began to shift. Not just in the courtroom, but in their hearts. It was the turning point. The moment when fear turned into faith and laughter turned into respect. And from that moment on, Malik Carter wasn't just a little boy fighting for his home. He was a symbol of what happens when love, courage, and truth stand together, even in the face of power. The courtroom was quiet again, the kind of quiet that made every heartbeat sound louder. Denise sat with her hands clasped tightly together, her eyes fixed on the judge's bench. Malik sat beside her, his blue notebook resting on his lap, his pencil tucked neatly behind his ear. Though he tried to look calm, his small foot tapped nervously against the floor. Each second felt like an hour. It had been 3 long days since the last hearing. 3 days of waiting, wondering, and praying. Denise had barely slept. Every night she'd lie awake, replaying every word, every look, every sentence that had been spoken in court. Malik would sometimes sit beside her, reading softly from his notebook, whispering things like, "We did good, Mom. We told the truth." And those words became her comfort. Her anchor. Now as the judge walked in, everyone stood. Malik's heart beat faster. The man who once seemed so distant and unreachable now looked thoughtful, almost kind. He took his seat, adjusted his glasses, and opened a folder. The rustle of paper echoed through the silent room. The landlord sat on the other side, his lawyer beside him, both looking pale and restless. Denise felt Malik squeeze her hand. She looked down at him, and he whispered, "No matter what, we did our best." She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "Yes, baby. We did," she replied softly. The judge looked up, his eyes sweeping across the courtroom, then settling on Denise. "Mrs. Carter," he began, "this court has reviewed all the evidence presented." His tone was serious, but there was warmth behind it. "And I want to acknowledge the effort and clarity shown in your defense." Denise nodded nervously. "Thank you." "Your Honor," she whispered. He continued, "It is clear from the documents, photographs, and testimonies that the landlord failed to maintain basic living conditions required by law." The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Trying to hide his unease, the judge glanced at him briefly, then turned back to Denise. "Furthermore, it is evident that the tenant, that is you, Mrs. Carter, and fulfilled your financial responsibilities on time." Malik held his breath. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't even blink. The judge paused, adjusting his papers again. "Therefore," he said slowly, "this court rules in favor of the tenant, Mrs. Denise Carter." For a second, Denise couldn't move. The words hung in the air like music she couldn't believe she was hearing. Malik looked up at her, eyes wide. "Mom," he whispered, "we won." The courtroom seemed to fade away. All the walls, the people, the noise, everything disappeared for a moment, leaving only a mother and her son sitting together in stunned silence. Then Denise exhaled sharply, tears spilling down her cheeks. She covered her face with her hands and began to sob. Not the kind of sobs that come from sadness, but from relief, pure, overwhelming relief. Malik threw his arms around her, whispering, "It's okay, Mom. It's really over now." She hugged him tightly, holding him as if she never wanted to let go. The judge smiled faintly, watching the two of them. "I also wish to commend this young man," he said, his voice carrying gently through the room. Malik looked up, startled. "Me, sir?" he asked. The judge nodded. "Yes, you, young man. Your respect for the court, your preparation, and your courage are remarkable." Malik looked down shyly. "Thank you, Your Honor," he said, his voice small but steady. The judge continued, "You've reminded us all that justice isn't about age or status. It's about truth." The lawyer looked away. Ashamed, the landlord avoided everyone's eyes. His arrogance gone, the judge then turned to the landlord. "You are hereby ordered to repair the damages immediately and cover the tenant's legal costs," he said firmly. "And any attempt to retaliate or harass this family in the future will be met with severe legal action." The landlord nodded stiffly, muttering, "Yes, Your Honor," as the gavel struck the desk. The sound echoed through the courtroom like thunder after a long storm. The case was closed. People began to murmur quietly, but their words were different now. They were kind, respectful, filled with admiration for the small boy who had stood up to power. One woman leaned over to another and whispered, "That child's going to change lives someday." A man in the back said softly, "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in this courtroom." Denise heard pieces of it, but she didn't care what they said. She was lost in the moment, the warmth of her son's arms around her, the feeling of peace flooding her heart, the knowledge that they had won not through luck, but through love and truth. As they walked out of the courtroom, people smiled and nodded at them. Some even clapped softly. Malik felt shy and confused. "Why are they clapping, Mom?" he asked. Denise laughed through her tears. "Because they saw what I've always known," she said, "that you're special." Outside, the sun was shining brightly. The sky looked clear and endless. Malik squinted up at it and grinned. "It's like the sun was waiting for us," he said. Denise smiled. "Maybe it was," she replied. They walked down the courthouse steps slowly. Each step lighter than the last. A reporter ran up to them, microphone in hand. "Excuse me, Mrs. Carter," she said kindly. "People are calling your son the little lawyer. How does that make you feel?" Denise laughed softly, brushing Malik's hair. "I don't need titles," she said. "I just know he's my hero." Malik blushed and looked down. "I just wanted to help my mom," he murmured. Later that night, back home, the small apartment felt different. It wasn't perfect when the cracks were still there, the heater still broken, but it no longer felt like a place of fear. It felt like victory. Denise cooked dinner, humming softly. Malik sat at the table, writing in his notebook again. When she asked what he was doing, he said, "I'm making a list of new things to learn." "What kind of things?" she asked, smiling. Malik looked up, his eyes bright. "About laws, about people, about how to help others," he said, "because maybe one day I can help someone else like you." Denise felt tears again, but this time she didn't hide them. She reached over and hugged him tightly. "You already helped more than you'll ever know," she whispered. That night, as Malik fell asleep, his blue notebook rested on the bedside table. Next to it was a note Denise had written in her careful handwriting. It said, "To my son, who taught me to be brave." The wind outside rustled softly, and the moonlight fell across his face. Calm and peaceful justice had been served. But more than that, a seed had been planted. A dream had been born, and in that small, quiet home, a little boy who once stood trembling in a courtroom now slept with a heart full of hope, unaware that the story of the little lawyer would soon travel far beyond their neighborhood, reminding the world that courage has no age, and love can turn even the smallest voices into the loudest truth. Years passed, but people still remembered the day the court fell silent for a 9-year-old boy. They remembered the laughter that had turned into awe, the disbelief that had turned into respect, and the mother and son who had walked into the courthouse as underdogs and walked out as symbols of strength. Malik Carter grew up in that same neighborhood. The walls of their small apartment still had cracks, but they were no longer symbols of struggle. They were reminders of where he came from, where he started. His mother kept every paper from that court case in a neat folder, labeled carefully. Carter versus Turner. The day we stood tall, sometimes. She would take it out, hold it in her lap, and smile, remembering how her little boy had once stood taller than everyone in that room. Malik never forgot, even as he grew older. The memory stayed with him. The sound of the gavel, the quiet after truth had been spoken, the way his mother's tears had felt on his shoulder. Those moments had built something inside him that no school could teach. At 13, he started volunteering at a small community center, helping people read legal letters they didn't understand. He would sit beside older men and women, explaining things in simple words. "It just means they can't charge you extra rent," he'd say gently, his voice full of patience. The same patience his mother had shown him. People would thank him, calling him the little lawyer again. The name had stuck. Denise watched him proudly. Though her life was still hard, she had started cleaning offices again, this time with her head held high. She often said, "The world didn't change." "But we did," Malik would nod and reply. And that's enough for now. One afternoon, Malik came home from school carrying a newspaper, his face glowing. "Mom, look," he said excitedly. There on the second page was a small story about him. "Local boy inspires tenants to know their rights." The reporter had written about how Malik helped families in the neighborhood understand eviction notices, how he had printed flyers with simple steps. 1. Keep your receipts. 2. Take photos. 3. Don't give up. Denise laughed through her tears, hugging him tightly. "You're becoming famous," she teased. Malik smiled shyly. "I don't want fame, Mom. I just want people to be treated fair." She kissed his forehead. "Then you're already doing what you were meant to do," she said softly. As the years went on, Malik's name spread beyond their small block. A local radio host invited him to speak about his experience. His voice, though older, still carried the same calm confidence. "I was scared," he said on air. "But I learned that when you stand for truth, even the biggest rooms can go quiet." People listening at home felt goosebumps. When Malik turned 16, a local law firm reached out, offering him a summer internship. They remembered his story from years ago. The headline still sat in their archives. "Boy lawyer defends his mother and wins on his first day." He wore a simple shirt and carried the same blue notebook, now filled with new notes, new dreams. His mentor, Attorney Williams, looked at him and said, "You've got something special, Malik. Not just brains, heart. And that's what this world needs." Back home, Denise couldn't stop smiling when she saw him come back from the office, his eyes glowing. "How was it?" she asked. Malik grinned. It felt like being back in court again, but this time, no one laughed. They both laughed together, their laughter now full of joy instead of pain. Years later, Malik walked across the stage at his high school graduation, the entire audience clapping loudly. Denise sat in the front row, holding a bouquet of flowers she could barely afford, tears streaming down her face as Malik took his diploma. He looked into the crowd and found her. He raised his hand slightly and smiled. She mouthed the words, "I'm proud of you." He nodded, his heart full that night. After everyone else had gone to sleep, Malik sat by the window, looking out at the same street where he once walked to the courthouse as a child. The moonlight shone softly on his notebook, now worn out, its edges torn, its pages filled with years of writing. He opened the first page. There, in small handwriting, were the words he had written years ago. "Help Mom. Tell the truth. Don't be scared," he smiled and whispered. Still the plan. Time moved on. Malik went to college, studying law just like everyone had predicted. But for him, it wasn't about titles or money. It was about justice, about the people who couldn't find their voice, about children who saw unfairness and felt too small to speak. He wanted them to know they weren't small at all. Denise grew older, her hair streaked with silver, but her smile never faded every time she looked at Malik in his suit. Heading out to work at the legal aid office, she'd whisper a small prayer of thanks. He turned pain into purpose, she'd say to herself. He turned laughter into light. Sometimes, Malik would still visit that same courthouse, now as an attorney. He would stand at the same spot where he once sat beside his mother, remembering the echo of laughter that had once filled the room, and the silence that followed when truth spoke louder. The clerks recognized him now. They'd smile and whisper, "That's him, the boy who made the court listen." Malik would smile humbly and reply, "It was never about making them listen. It was about making them see." One afternoon as he was leaving the courthouse, a little boy ran up to him holding his mother's hand. "Are you the lawyer who helped his mom when he was a kid?" The boy asked shyly. Malik crouched down, smiling. "Yes, I am." The boy's eyes widened. "I want to do that too," he said proudly. Malik smiled wider. "Then promise me something," he said gently. "Always stand for what's right, even when no one else does." The boy nodded seriously. As they walked away, Malik looked up at the courthouse once more, the same sunlight spilling over its tall steps, and he thought about his journey. From a scared 9-year-old boy clutching a notebook, to a man helping others find their voice, he smiled softly, whispering to himself, "This is what Mom fought for." And somewhere deep in his heart, he knew that courage doesn't end when a verdict is read. It lives on, in every act of kindness, every voice that speaks truth, and every soul that refuses to be silent. And so the story of the little boy who silenced the court became more than a memory. It became a legacy, a living reminder that love and courage, no matter how small they begin, can echo forever.